Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be talking about the Anbernic RG28XX. Yeah, this one. We can call this a review if you want, but honestly I am just not the target audience for this device. So it's going to be more of a mock review / discussion about this device, and you'll get my thoughts and all of that in a normal review, but I mean, I don't think a lot of people are going to care what I think because right off the bat, I'm telling you, it's not a device for me. And so we'll come at it from that perspective. This is the new Anbernic RG28XX, and I say new as if they haven't been releasing a device a week since they started 2024. We could start referring them in weeks at this point. This is the week 15 device for Anbernic. And before I even get to do my review, they already have a new device coming out in the RG35XXSP. So it just tells you how quick that they're moving and devices are flying at this point. But the good news is that by the time this review comes out, the RG28XX will have a Pro version that you could probably buy. Now, what's so special about this device here is the size. It is very small. It's a small boy in pretty much every way except for performance, really. Small D-pad, small buttons, small form factor, and all of that. It's a micro handheld, and it's likely a niche purchase for a lot of people. So let's start right off the bat with a disclaimer again. Micro devices are just not for me. They're not my cup of tea. They're not my kind of devices. And as a reviewer, you get all sorts of devices in and you review them, and you kind of have to put yourself in the shoes of who this might be for. But that's tough when it's just not something that you care about. And I have micro devices everywhere. I have the Miu Mini, TrimUI Smart is somewhere. I have so many smaller devices. I don't even remember all of them. I have the A30, the Miu A30 that just came in. And so I get them in and I play with them, and they just never really hit for me. They're never a device that sticks. And I'm like, I want to go play with that. It's always, okay, yeah, we can start playing more games on a smaller screen. That's great. I want to play something else. That's kind of how I feel about micro devices. So I say all of that to once again give the disclaimer that micro devices are just not for me. So if you're looking for that type of review, not going to be this one, but we'll talk about it from my perspective and what I think about the Anbernic RG28XX. I forgot the name. First up, special thanks to Go Game Geek for sending me this device for review. As usual, they have no input in what I say and they haven't seen this video ahead of time. But if you're interested in buying this or any other devices, check out their website and you can use code JOEY for 15% off. Let's go over some specs quickly so we can get back to the good stuff. This has a 2.83-inch 640 by 480 screen. It's using the H700 CPU. There's 1 GB of RAM. We have a Linux-only operating system. 3100 milliamp hour battery, which translates to about 6 to 8 hours, and there's HDMI out. Pricing wise, this translates to about $56 US shipped right now. So the very first thing that I noticed about this device was that it rattles a lot. It's kind of like a Tic Tac box or a baby rattle. And I was making that joke in the Discord, but it very much is a baby's rattle. And I was calling this a baby toy, and it kind of is, but we'll get to that. Either way, the rattle is, yeah, it's kind of annoying, and I'm sure you could probably fix that if you really wanted, but it's the first thing that stood out. The second is that it's very easy to pull in and out of a pocket, and it's thin enough that it doesn't feel like a bulge either. Size-wise, for those that have the TrimUI Smart already, we can call it basically a draw between the two, except the 28XX has a much larger screen, of course, and much more power. You just lose the Wi-Fi, which is a feature that personally I really want. This has a very small D-pad, small buttons, but they're functional. I find the D-pad to be a bit on the stiff side, with a little pressure needed to push down, but it's pretty good. It's not a bad D-pad, but it's not my favorite either. They could have put something larger here, it really is too small for me. On the other side, these buttons are really small. My thumb is as big as all 4 buttons. In practice, it's not the worst that I've ever used. I mean, I can press buttons and I don't seem to get many issues with not hitting the right button that I want to hit, but it does happen. And all of this just doesn't feel great. It's just fine. I find myself just having to play around of these issues instead of enjoying the time that I'm playing with the device. So continuing our tour here, and besides the front, we have some very awkward and small shoulders. R1 and L1 specifically are just weird, and I'm not a big fan of them at all. Same with the buttons on the side. They're a bit hard to push down, and unfortunately, it's buttons that you use quite a bit, like volume and power. This has HDMI out, which is nice to see, and testing it, it seems to work just fine from what I can tell. And as far as the headphone jack goes, I didn't get any static or anything, and it seemed to work fine as well. I think the weirdest thing about this device is that it doesn't feel uncomfortable or weird to me. And I mean that in the sense of a micro. Micros are usually not comfortable. I'm not going to say this is a very comfortable device because it isn't. But I think for the amount of time that you would be playing something like this, I have to assume that you would be using a micro in very short bursts. You're going to go out for a walk, you want it for a quick 15 minutes, or you're going to the park and you want it for a few minutes. That's the sort of idea. But if you're at home and you have hours to spend, I can't imagine that you'd be picking this up. And secondly, I personally would never have it being comfortable for that long. However, the major error that I have here, especially when it comes to a use case, if you're going to be taking it outdoors and all that sort of thing, is the fact that the screen isn't great for bright, sunny days. So you're most likely going to stick to a day where it's cloudy and all of that, and then it'll look fine. But like most handhelds, and this isn't specific to this one, they don't do well in the outdoors with these screens. So it's not any different here. And I think for this, you'd want it to be, especially if you're going to be taking it in a pick up and play situation. But again, I am not the micro target audience, so I don't know what exactly you all want. But if I was trying to put myself in your shoes, I think I would just want better. Now, while the buttons and D-pad and all of that are micro, the performance and battery are definitely not. There's a 2.8-inch 640 by 480 screen here, and on it, you can play up to PlayStation 1 games perfectly, but you can play some Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast and PSP if you're crazy, because you have no sticks, so N64 is kind of a disaster for the most part, but you can play some of those games. Performance isn't perfect on them. You're going to spend a lot of time tweaking and all that sort of thing, and if you're at all familiar with any of the other H700 processor devices, the 35XX plus H24 and all of those, it's the exact same here, no difference. So that being said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time playing those systems, and I really didn't. I tried. Some of them weren't even mapped out of the box. The D-pad wasn't mapped to the stick, so it wouldn't move out of the box. And I kind of just lost interest. I'm like, I could go and map this and set it all up properly and all that sort of thing, but I just don't care enough to do so. So for me, and I think for most people, unless you're really, really crazy, you would have to look at this as a PS1 and under device, and that's what you want to play on the go. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. Because honestly, trying to map the D-pad to the stick and then using R2 to change it to C buttons for the buttons and doing all of these little things, it just, man, there's so many other ways that I could play Nintendo 64 and have it feel good that having such a compromised experience just to save an inch is not something that I want to do at all. So again, when I say PS1 and under, I literally mean that. So PlayStation 1 and all of the Game Boys, Game Boy Advance, Super Nintendo, Nintendo, Game Gear, Sega Genesis, and all of those sorts of systems play really well on here. Now, it's not just performance that's the only thing that's not micro. Battery life on this is actually really good. For example, I didn't clock it, but I played a lot of Super Nintendo on here, and I'm pretty sure that I was able to get at least 6 hours of battery life, if not 8 maybe, if I had to guess, over the course of time, and that is actually exceptional for a device like this. Now, there are some weird things that I noticed in the software, and so we'll talk about that for a little bit. Number one, you should be happy that it comes with a branded SD card from Kioxia, which is Toshiba. So no recommendation for me to replace the operating system card at least. But as we jump into the operating system, the first thing that you're likely going to get confused about is Game Rooms and RA Game. Seemingly, it all looks the same, but my advice is to stick to RA Game for all of your game playing needs, and just forget that Game Rooms exists. That's my standard blanket advice for anybody new to this hobby, just to make it simple. There's a menu button on the top of the handheld that does something different depending on where you are, in a game or in the main menu or somewhere else. But if you push it and the volume buttons, you get easy access to brightness control. Here's a pro tip, and don't laugh. Honestly, just read the manual that it came with. It's shockingly detailed. For example, it shows you all of the hotkey shortcuts, and it also tells you how to add your own blank SD card into the second slot if you want one. Manuals, people, it's 1990 all over again. A lot of people say they don't hear it, and for some reason they get mad at me for saying this, but for those that do hear it, I'm going to mention it. There is still a buzz on this model device that plays every time you exit a game and you load a game, and it's still present here the same way that it's present on my 35XX Plus and my 35XXH. I get that there's a lot of you out there that for some reason don't hear it or for some reason think that it doesn't exist, but it's a buzzing noise. It's a little kind of connection buzzing noise that happens every time, and it is so annoying for anybody that's susceptible to it, so that's the reason I mention it. Now, some other things that I noticed in the firmware when I first got the device is the aspect ratio being weird. Like Game Boy Advance was using full screen instead of the right 3:2 aspect ratio. However, if you update to version 1.0.3 at least, it fixes GBA scaling, and it also adds an overlay. I show how to update everything in my setup guide for this device. There's also quite a few options missing in RetroArch. The fix I found was to head to Settings, RetroArch Settings, Start RetroArch, head to Settings, User Interface, Menu Item Visibility, Quick Menu, turn on Show Shaders, On-Screen Overlay, Save Core Overrides, and Save Game Overrides. Push B to back all the way out and go to Configuration File, Save Current Configuration. For some reason, all of those menu options were missing, and as somebody who does not like shaders and overlays and all of that, I really needed that to be there to remove them. Now, another weird thing about the firmware is you're going to be greeted by a pop-up on the left side of your screen. Because the display panel is rotated, notifications in RetroArch show on the left, which is just funny. Oh, and frame rate shows on the bottom right, facing left. So yeah. Now, I know a lot of you like the stock operating system firmware, but I know that custom firmware is working on fixing this if they haven't already. So it might be annoying enough for you to just jump ship to a custom firmware. And so throughout all of this, I kind of felt myself running through games, and you can play on this, and yeah, they play just well. They play fine. All of the PS1 and under systems are the bread and butter of this device, and they all play fine. But I just didn't feel anything while doing so. Listen, I really can't fake enthusiasm for a device like others might be able to. So for me, it just doesn't tick the boxes that make Joey excited about playing on something. Especially, and again, it's going to go back to this, but it really is the D-pad and buttons that just put me off of this device. I think if you were to take the D-pad and buttons from the MIUI A30 and combine them into this 28XX, I might have a better time. It still wouldn't be a device that I would use on a daily basis or all of that sort of thing, but it would definitely be a better device for it. And so that's kind of where I'm at the end of the day. This sort of crosses into that territory of it's cool and niche for 5 minutes, and then it sits on my shelf because I just don't have a use case for this, or a want or a need or a motivation to even play on it. However, for those of you that want a micro, I have to assume that this is exactly what you want. It's micro, it plays a lot of systems, it's got great battery life. It all depends on if you can make do with, number one, the rattle, number two, the weird shoulder buttons, number three, the major one, the weird D-pad and the buttons, the very small D-pad and buttons, which I think that's going to be the big hang up for a lot of people. Now the problem is, what's the competition? The Trim UI Smart, which I have on my shelf, is really good. I'm a big fan of it, but it shows its age compared to this, of course, but you're losing a few things like Wi-Fi and all of that. So this becomes a de facto choice for a lot of people. However, there is the MIUI A30, and the MIUI A30 has its own share of problems, which we're going to talk about in that review. So you're kind of left with this being the de facto best option currently. So once again, it goes back to it for me. And again, this is for me. This doesn't make sense. The 35XXH does. It is a good size. It is still pocketable. Wi-Fi is on here. Everything just works. It's got all of the bells and whistles that the 28XX has, but more. It is a full-featured, complete device. And I think unless you're going for a niche micro purchase, which of course you can go this route, for most other people, the 35XXH is going to be the better device. But with the 35XXSP right around the corner, I have to imagine that not a lot of people are going to be as excited for this as people are for the SP. And I think that's kind of where we're at the end of the day with this one. So to end this all off, is this a recommend? I think so, yeah. It's not a bad device in any way, shape, or form. It is a good device. If you can get over the small D-pad and the buttons and you're looking for a micro and that is your niche use case, then it is a complete recommend from me. This hobby likes to continually push devices on you, and the fact that by the time I got to this review, we already have a new Anbernic coming out that might actually replace this for a lot of people. So if this isn't for you, or if you're thinking of maybe making some sort of concession, you're like, maybe that D-pad might be okay, maybe those buttons are okay, just wait. Or buy something else. I mean, we have so many devices to choose from that it no longer makes sense for you to force yourself into a specific device if it's not for you. That's going to be it for this one. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow, and hope you all have a good one.